Hey everybody, thank you very much for joining us for our first GDPR webinar titled 30 Days After GDPR. My name is Eyal Katz. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Namogoo. I will also introduce our guests in just a minute. So as I mentioned, the webinar is titled 30 Days After GDPR, What Have We Learned and What's Next? This is the first webinar in a GDPR webinars series. And each webinar will conclude a certain period of time and will map out the development of GDPR over time and hopefully better prepare us for what is still to come with GDPR, PIPEDA, which is Canada's version of GDPR, and California's privacy law, all set to dramatically progress in 2018. Now, let's turn on our webcams. Rob, Gillian, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Right, Ken?
Yep.
All right. Would you like to turn on your webcams?
It's not allowing me to.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, me as well. So hold on just a second while we solve this really quickly. Just 1 second. Thank you everybody for holding on. All right. Just hold on for a quick minute while we solve this technical difficulty.
Should I do some GDPR jokes
GDPR.
while you wait? You want me to warm up the crowd?
Yeah, sure. If you got one up your sleeve, then yeah, please do.
Well, first of all, I just need everyone at one at a time to give consent to hearing this thing. If uh, it's all about consent. It's all about compliance.
All right. Well, I mean, we may just turn this webinar very quickly into a podcast. I will share my screen where we basically have our welcome slide. And unfortunately, they won't be able to see Rob's handsome and Gillian's beautiful faces unless we are able to solve this webcam difficulty we are currently facing. But otherwise, we will just have to go on without access to webcams. So while I do the introductions, I'd like to load up the first poll. So Shira, if you could load up the first poll question while we do this. So this webinar will focus again on 30 days after GDPR deadline, and we originally were supposed to have Alexandra Issininger, CEO and co-founder of Linkilaw, join us, but in her stead we have Gillian. We have Gillian Fishman. Gillian Fishman is a legal consultant at Linkilaw, the legal platform for startups and small businesses. And from 2015 to 2017, Linkilaw pivoted from solely a legal marketplace to also becoming a legal platform for startups and SMEs. In 2017, Linkilaw acquired UK leading legal marketplace Lawyerfair. In this last year, Linkilaw experienced 500% growth. Gillian specializes in commercial contracts and data protection and has helped hundreds of businesses with GDPR compliance. Rob, our other guest speaker during this webinar / podcast, Rob Beeler is currently chairman of AdMonsters and founder of Beeler Tech. Rob founded Beeler Tech in September 2016 to share his 20 years of ad operations and ad tech experience. And he basically connects between large publishers, agencies, and brands, and consults them with training on digital media revenue platforms. Rob has been with AdMonsters since 2008, serving as editor-in-chief of AdMonsters.com and lead on AdMonsters global conferences focused on ad technology and digital media. Prior, he was executive director of ad operations and analytics at Advanced Internet, now Advanced Digital, a leading creator of local news and information across the United States from 1999 to 2008. And Rob has extensive knowledge in digital advertising, display, programmatic, video, native, and mobile, training in event management and content programming. He's a member of the IAB Digital Operations Certification Program and Exam Committee. All right, awesome. And I am, as I mentioned, my name is Eyal Katz. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for Namogoo's GDPR Insights. Namogoo's GDPR Insights is basically a software solution that helps digital publishers avoid data breaches through continuous and automated monitoring of their data processors, which in case of digital publishers is mostly MarTech and AdTech stacks. All right, now we got our introductions out of the way. And so 30 days, we're a little bit over the 30-day mark, and quite a bit has happened with GDPR. So I'm going to start with just like doing a little bit of a recap of what's happened so far. So we started off with Facebook and Google getting sued right off the bat, just pretty much on day one. They were both hit by lawsuits by an Austrian privacy activist. And large US publishers chose to shut off their properties for EU traffic rather than go through what it takes to comply with GDPR. We saw ad revenue sharply decrease, only to quickly return and turn around to close to pre-GDPR numbers. And we saw ad tech companies close their doors rather than try to comply. But we didn't see a doomsday scenario for ad tech. We saw companies like Evidon or Facebook make pretty bad data breaches, but their consequences are still very much unclear. But what is probably most common, the most common talking point coming out of the 30 days past the GDPR deadline is the misconceptions around GDPR. The EU Commission has left a lot of gray areas in GDPR, and I'm sure you've all encountered these. So basically, my first question, and I would like to direct it to Gillian, if you could answer this first. What is the most common misconception or misconceptions that that you've encountered with GDPR?
I think the most common misconception that I've seen so far is people thinking consent is the silver bullet, that everything you do requires explicit consent. And you know, you've seen a ton of companies go on these campaigns both before and after the GDPR was implemented, trying to get renewed consent from people, when in a lot of cases that wasn't necessary in the first place. And actually the regulatory guidance recommends that you try to use a different basis. So there's other reasons that you can use to legally process information, and they say you should use reasons other than consent wherever possible. So I think there's been a ton of talk around consent when there didn't need to be necessarily.
So like, if it wasn't consent, what other way would you have of, if I understand this correctly, there are other ways of basically complying rather than actually requesting direct consent. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So there are 6 what they call lawful bases for processing information under GDPR. The first one is explicit consent, which, like I said, is the one that most people have been focusing on. But in a lot of cases, you can rely on a different reason that you have to process someone's information. So, for example, in the business context, the most common example that I see when working with our clients at Linkilaw is that people are relying on the contractual basis. So what the law says is, if you have a contract with somebody, so if somebody's your client, your business supplier, your employee, a lot of the big categories of people you're collecting information about, then you can process their information whatever you need to do to fulfill that contract without getting their explicit consent.
Okay, very interesting. Rob, what has been your most common misconception that you've encountered?
Yeah, and again, so I'm dealing with the ad operations people mostly at publishers, and one of the things is big misconception is that you're done, right? May 25th passed, and this isn't, and you don't have to worry about this anymore. I think there's a part as GDPR is weaved into more things that it's going to be something of a daily issue of you're going to probably say GDPR on a daily basis at some point. Not yet, because I think we're all kind of waiting to see. I also think that there's obviously in the US just kind of a feeling that this doesn't affect you. You already hinted at what's going on in Canada. There's obviously some discussion about what might happen in the US at a state level. I think regardless of that geographic piece of it is really the pipes and the way that we transact within ad tech are going to be impacted by GDPR in terms of the signals being passed through, the way we buy, the way we think about things, and so it's going to have a much bigger impact than I think people have thought of in ways they're not thinking of yet.
All right. I mean, those are both really good points. I would also add that, at least from my perspective, what I've seen quite a bit is that a lot of companies outside the EU really feel that GDPR is not really concerned, that they're not too concerned about GDPR, and GDPR doesn't have anything to do with them. And it's there's a lot of gray area around the whole concept of how or to whom GDPR
Right.
is really effective for. And I think that there is a lot of misconception around that. I was recently at a local conference here in Israel, and we had a member of the EU Commission come in and mention something about tracking, and also about how if you want to even if you bring in basically anybody that you bring into your website, even if you're not an EU based company, and you track them in any kind of way, you basically are already compliant by you already have to be GDPR compliant to do any kind of basic tracking of any kind of EU resident. So even if you're not actively pursuing them, you're not trying to sell to them, you're not trying to market to them, if you have any kind of tracking software which is creating a user ID for that person, then in that case you would be required to be compliant with GDPR regardless of your geographical location, regardless of your business processes.
Yeah, I'll jump
go
in
ahead.
on that really quickly as well. I think another big misconception that came to mind when you were giving that example is not just people thinking it doesn't apply to them because of their location, but the word processing gets thrown around a lot, and there's kind of this thought and this misconception that it's a really specific definition, that you have to be doing some sort of technical special type of activity with the information for it to qualify. And if you look at the definition of processing in the GDPR, it essentially applies to anything that you do with someone's information. So as you mentioned, if you're tracking them, the second you write down someone's name or email address or store it in an Excel spreadsheet, put it on a lead list, something like that, you're considered to be processing that information. So the scope of activities is a lot broader than people think as well.
Right, and that really relates to a question we just got asked by Nate Palmer on what does GDPR require around Google Analytics and user tracking. So he says that he's gotten really conflicting opinions on this. And since Google Analytics places a cookie on the user's machine with a unique ID that allows Google to individually track them. So any kind of, from my understanding, and you guys can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, any kind of unique user ID, session ID, cookie ID, something that helps recognize an online user as a specific person, a specific user, which can then be used for targeting purpose, or could then be used to kind of like create an online persona, is considered personally identifiable information.
Yeah, that's correct. It is considered personally identifiable information when you have something that directly ties to a person. and can be used to identify them specifically. I think some of the ambiguity with tools like Google Analytics comes with how businesses are specifically using the information they're getting. So I've seen some businesses where they do look at those unique users and look at their unique activities, but I think that's kind of a smaller population of businesses, because if you're looking at what one individual is doing, then you're using personally identifiable information. But I've also seen, and I think the majority of businesses who are using the more basic functions of Google Analytics to just get an idea of what's happening in the aggregate. Like, 20% of my users clicked on our link through a Google search, or 30% came from a Facebook ad. If you're using information in the aggregate, then you're not looking at any particular individual. And so that's not personally identifiable information, even though the pieces of information that make up that statistic would be personally identifiable if you were looking at them one-on-one.
Right, great. And I guess we've already kind of touched on this, but Rob, I'd really like to get your perspective on this. I know a lot of large publishers, especially outside the EU, really feel like GDPR doesn't concern them. What would you say to them?
Yeah, no, I mean it does, right? They're wrong if they're kind of taking that stance. I do think that there is a part where, again, some of this has to do with corporate culture, has to do with how you work with your legal team. I think that for a lot of publishers and companies outside the EU, there has been very much a wait and see type of attitude. So in the cases of like Trunk, where they have actually turned off their their websites to the EU. I actually happened to be in Milan and happened to click on a link, not even thinking about it, and then realized I couldn't actually access it. It was pretty jarring actually to just not get content when I wanted to. I think at time, and I always let the attorney speak on this. Gillian can correct me if I'm wrong on this, right? But that's not the spirit of what GDPR is trying to accomplish. I think ultimately that's not going to be the strategy that works. But there is a part about waiting for a little bit more direction on certain aspects of this, where I could see companies just saying, let's wait and see what happens. The unfortunate part, for those of us that are dealing with the technology piece of it, it isn't like, oh, here's something that has actually been announced, here's a ruling, this is the way to do it, that you can go, okay, cool, let me flip that switch. It might take months to years to comply with something that comes out of, some of the things that come out of all the court cases and whatever. And so I think there's a wait and see attitude. I would sit there and think that having good data processes and a good relationship with your user, optically, it just serves you best to just start doing it. And it also shows an effort to comply, which will keep you from getting fees, or brought into court. At least that's my thought. Gillian, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. I think making an effort towards compliance, even though we don't know specifics and there are ambiguities in a lot of the practical implementation parts of it, is going to serve you a lot better than trying to eliminate your interactions with EU citizens. Because that's why some companies are limiting their services to only those outside of the EU. But I'd also add to that that's not necessarily going to work, because the law is meant to apply to anybody who handles an EU citizen's data. Just because you're not letting anyone with a connection inside the EU access that information, like your example just showed, you're not an EU citizen, you're a US citizen in the EU trying to access something. The opposite of that could be true. There could be EU citizens accessing information from around the world, and then you're falling afoul of that just by trying to make the solution simpler than it really is.
Yeah.
So just trying to clarify, so if you're an EU citizen outside of the EU, trying to access a non-EU website, a website that supposedly is not necessarily needs to be, or even one that is, since you're right, you're outside the EU, but you're an EU citizen. Does that mean that that website that has just that you've just landed on their domain, do they need to comply with GDPR if you are an EU citizen outside of the EU?
Yes, they do.
I think so. My only you know that more than I do. I think the part that I think most people are going to think about with that is again, someone from the EU and the US tries to access, they aren't asked for consent. Then what's their ability to go after that company, especially if that property doesn't even have an EU existence, right? I think there's one part of this, and again, by the way, this isn't about how to game this, right? I'm actually in favor of what the concept of GDPR is. But if I'm looking at it going like, are regulators going to go after my blog in the US first, right? Most likely not. So I'm probably okay with the EU citizens outside of the EU. At the same time, there's probably going to be a cottage industry of attorneys that are going after people to show that they're not complying with GDPR. It's going to be a nice little business to be in. But I got a feeling that the targets of that are still going to be companies that are in the EU or US companies that have an EU presence because, well, you can knock on their door and you can say, hey, you're not complying.
Right. I think that's true from the outset. I think the question of enforcement is one of those areas that is still very gray because the way that it's written, they've tried to make it as sweeping as possible so that it's going to apply to businesses outside of the EU in a lot of circumstances. But how that goes about getting enforced against those businesses is a question that we haven't necessarily fully seen the answer to yet.
Yeah, sorry, and I see that as something that would be very difficult, especially with the scenario of an EU citizen outside of the EU accessing any kind of a website. I mean, it would be very hard to, like, how would that website be required to know that that would be an EU citizen? That would be something that would be very difficult to enforce, I would think.
Right.
Right. Okay. So we kind of touched on the point of a lot of publishers who block out EU traffic. What do you guys think about the trend moving forward? Do you think that at some point they will have to comply, or can they just keep on doing this pretty much forever as more of a strategy? Rob, would you mind taking that one first?
Yeah, I mean, there will be, things related to GDPR are going to happen that I think are going to force their hand. And I mean, again, you already alluded to the fact that right now GDPR is about the EU. Similar regulations and laws will probably go into effect elsewhere. If you think about it, I'm stepping outside of my zone of expertise, but if I'm thinking politically about running for something, what a great platform to run on, which is I want to protect your privacy online. You're not going to have someone say like, well, I'm against that, right? So it's an argument to win votes, and it's something that, so I think that there will be more stuff that happens. I'm more focused on, I think, that how companies are actually trying to comply, right? So there are definitely some companies that are doing wait and see, but I don't think they're saying they're just never going to do it. I think people get that. I think it's just more of the amount of effort, and we're seeing effort. Some of the publishers I'm talking to, while front facing, it might not look like they're doing anything. They're trying to figure out the back end, right? And that's the other part of this, is that this is not just an ad tech issue. GDPR applies to, any data. And so if you have subscriptions, If you have any other kind of thing where you collect that information, as Gillian mentioned, you're collecting these email addresses or whatever, you're going to have to comply. And so there's a lot of back end stuff that I do hear people working on just to shore up and get their technology in place. And then, one of the examples I've heard that I just can't talk highly enough about that I think is just amazing. PGA Tour actually has someone in ad operations that now also reports into their legal team. And the reason they're doing that is because this is so complex. You can't work in a silo anymore. All this stuff is multi-departmental. And that means having someone who understands what you're doing when you're doing targeting or using this technology to do stuff. You need that basis, and then you need them to be able to talk to the legal team so you can actually figure out where you want to go with this and give good direction to the rest of the company. And I think that's just an amazing step, and maybe we see even more of that going forward.
Right. So I guess what you're saying is that ad operations might be evolving to a place where, for the one hand, they have to make sure that they're optimizing their revenue and increasing yields for the company. And then on the other hand, it also becomes part of the job description to maintain compliance with GDPR, but could also be compliance with, and sorry, Gillian, if we're getting a little bit ad techy here, but compliance with ads TXT and stuff like that. So there might be like a job description like that in ad operations in the near future. Would that be something you'd agree with?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, listen, from the very start of my career, the attorneys that I worked with would call me up and ask me to explain COPPA. They'd ask me to explain third-party targeting, behavioral targeting, and what it meant, because they obviously wanted the privacy policies to follow that. This is the same line. The technology tends to outstrip what anyone's legal team can keep up with. And by the way, obviously there are legal ramifications that the tech people need to understand. And so having people that can speak both languages is going to be really essential, I think, going forward. Maybe not the next 6 months, but next year, expect it to be in someone's job description to be able to speak some legalese. I don't know anyone that's gone into ad operations to get a legal degree, but maybe it'll happen.
So this is very interesting because now we also have Gillian on the line, and Gillian can give us the other perspective from the legal side of things. Gillian, would you agree with this, that there is room for there's increasingly room in online businesses for people who can combine technology with, as Rob puts it, legalese?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think legalese is a misleading way to put it a little bit because, one of the main goals of GDPR is to get away from that kind of language, to speak to people really clearly and have them understand in plain language what's going on with their data. So I think hopefully we'll see a departure from legalese, and I'm even okay with that as somebody who understands the language. I think it's time to get away from it, but I definitely think somebody who's aware of the regulatory requirements and can then turn around and know how that applies on a practical day-to-day basis is going to be huge.
Cool, that's interesting. That will be interesting to see how online publishing, in particular, and online businesses in general, develop in that sense. And actually, when it comes to digital publishing in particular, it would appear that what most have been concerned with is, as we mentioned in the start, about gaining user consent, using stuff like CMPs, consent management platforms, or cookie consent ribbons being displayed on their web properties. But the GDPR is about a lot more than just requesting consent to collect personal data. It's about the data itself and what we do with it and how we do it. So, Gillian, what do you feel will be the biggest GDPR compliance issue moving forward past consent?
I think once you have consent, and I think this is true in across all kinds of businesses, you have to make sure that you're putting in the right back-end processes to make sure you're recording it correctly. You need to be, getting timestamps of when people have consented, the language they consented to, and be able to demonstrate that going forward. And the automation of those types of processes and figuring out exactly how that's going to work in your business specifically, I think is the next step. And also to, periodically review what you're asking people to consent to and making sure that it's changing along with any changes in your business. Wherever it's possible to give people more options, you're supposed to give those options. So as your business evolves, as the technology evolves, to be able to separate options, then you'd, have to implement ways to actually maintain that on the back end.
So basically, gain consent and maintain it over time in a way that is, I don't want to say automated, but in a way that is kind of like running in the background, but at the same time is also reliable, that you can trust it to run in the background, and on scale would be where online businesses should be going. Would that be
Right.
accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. And when it comes to the different types of tracking and cookies and all the different ways that we're collecting information, I'm not advanced in the technology area by any means, but I think we'll see additional development for how you can separate out, people being able to consent to one type of processing over another. And when they submit that request or that piece of information, having a system that can then ensure that the types of tracking or the types of data collection that they don't want are automatically filtered out.
All right. And Rob, what would be your take on this? What would be your, what do you think is the biggest GDPR compliance issue moving past consent?
Yeah, well, I'll go philosophical. So first of all, I agree with everything that Gillian just said, and I'm of course regretting my legalese comment and or my labeling that way. But I think
I don't take it personally.
No, okay, good. The two areas I'm watching with it, so maybe not the biggest, but is obviously that certainly within ad tech, we're going to need tools that monitor what's going on, because as always gotten this industry in trouble, it's not necessarily your partner, it's your partner's partner, and that partner's partner's partner. At some point, someone needs to make money, and so they start doing deals with the devil, and it goes all the way upstream, right? And so you will work on consent and you'll work on that, and then you're going to have partners who just don't follow through with what they're supposed to do. And so it's going to be very important not only to have those tools Gillian mentioned in terms of how to handle what you're doing, but monitoring what everyone else is doing to make sure that you're doing it right. That's not a plug for Namogoo, but it obviously you're in that area, and it's important. More philosophically, as people understand and come to the conclusion that GDPR is a real thing, and the underlying part was not to just have some kind of legislation to hurt us, and that the fact is that people, not users, people have a right to privacy and understand how their data is being used. The conversation that publishers have with consumers and users and people is going to evolve. That could be the most beautiful thing that comes out of this, right? Which is an understanding that I am publishing content, I need to get paid. Here's how I'd like to do it, so you don't have to pay out of your pocket, unless of course that's what you want, right? But to have that kind of level of conversation could mean a whole new level of relationship between really brands, publishers, and people that could be really awesome if we go about it the right way.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole move with publishers is towards relationships, and this could be a big part of that. And and you kind of touched on that. I know you, of course, you didn't mean to plug, but I will though. So at Namogoo, what we're seeing is that a lot of publishers, that once they've gained consent, they do need to have a system in place to maintain compliance. And that's why we feel that GDPR Insights is a great tool for digital publishers who want to keep, to track and make sure that all their data processors are maintaining compliance. So that's it for the plug. If anybody would like to hear more information about GDPR Insights, then they should just fill in the survey that will appear shortly on your screen. But let's move on. So 30 days, as I mentioned, yeah. So we're back to talking about 30 days after the GDPR, and I'd like to talk about something that's a concept that is relatively new to GDPR consent, and that's browser-based consent. I don't know if you've heard about this. I just heard about this relatively recently, and basically, it's instead of asking for consent on a website by website basis, the user would provide their consent in their browser. They would just need to do this once, and will allow them to provide consent once. The browser then basically behaves like a CMP, and all the services can sign up for that so-called CMP, which is basically the browser. And then you can collect personal data in that way. It's a little bit, it can be considered a more comfortable way of managing consent. So Gillian, I don't know if you've heard about browser-based consent before, but what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have heard of this, and it is a concept that's just started to emerge recently, as you mentioned. I think it's a great idea in theory, but coming from the legal perspective, I will be interested to see how it's actually implemented because, when I think about a blanket consent that is in my browser but applies to a whole myriad of websites, in my mind, that doesn't sound like something that would be GDPR compliant because of what I mentioned earlier, allowing people to have as many options as possible. So one of the guidance points has said that consent for a blanket category of businesses is not compliant. So I don't know how they would get around that issue, whether it's segmenting it by business type, segmenting it by type of information that's collected, uses of that information. But I think it's got to be a little bit more complicated than just one overarching consent mechanism. And I also think that the success of that kind of idea going forward is going to depend on the user reactions as well. Because, personally, I would be happy to get rid of cookie banners and not see them anymore. I would love to, be able to give one consent that gets rid of all of that daily hassle of clicking through every website that you go to. But I think for other people, the GDPR and some of the scandals with Google, Cambridge Analytica, with Facebook, has been more of a wake-up call than anything, and it's made certain people want even more control over their data. So I think there's going to be two camps of people when it comes to that type of option. Some people who think it's a great idea, and some people who really would prefer to be consenting on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, it's GDPR is about the users, and it's about creating a better user experience out there. So, Rob, what's your take on browser consent?
Don't get me started on this one. This one's the one that fires me up, right? Because you're absolutely right. As a user,
Rob?
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Rob, I don't think we can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Oh, shoot. Can you hear me?
I can still hear you, Rob, but I'm not sure what's going on the other end.
Rob, I can't hear you if you're speaking right.
But Gillian, can you say something to him and see if he hears you?
Yeah, you can still hear me all right, is that right? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I wonder, may just be that we're
Oh,
talking to each other at this point.
oh boy. Oh, and this was the one I was all fired up about. Um, oh, he
Sorry,
might be able.
I couldn't.
I think people could hear us, but I don't think Eyal could.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you there for a minute, but I can hear you now.
Okay.
Oh, good. Okay.
And
But
here
I
I
guess-
am, I was like all fired up, right? And then it was like, wait, no one can hear me? Come on. I was like getting all animated here. Wish we had the
Yeah.
webcams. So
Looks like it was just me.
yeah, so from a user's perspective, right, I think the browser-based thing could win out because it is going to be annoying to get consent on every site, as you both mentioned. Agree with that. It's a trap. It's a trap. So one of the reasons that we are doing this is because of Google. Who's got the biggest browser out there? Google. Um, if Facebook, does want to get in the space, they could do it as well. It's the big guys are the ones that control the browsers, and if we relinquish this to them, it's essentially their data. They may be doing it as they might. It's just to me, um, I think I can't dismiss it. I think it's going to happen, or at least there's going to be conversations about it. But the very people that I think should not be having control of this are the ones that are going to get control of it if we
Right.
move to browser-based solutions.
Right. Yeah. It seems like it could be a kind of a catch-22 in that sense. So yeah, I completely understand that point of view. So, and I also see that, after about 30 days into GDPR, that most of the EU businesses, especially, but also businesses outside the EU, are doing a lot better than we may have thought that they would be 30 days in. That GDPR is not it wasn't as Armageddon-y as maybe we would have first thought. So, Rob, if you can go first, I'd like to ask, do you think this is because that a lot of businesses have actually been doing a great job being compliant, or is it that GDPR is more hype than anything else?
Wow. Well, those are two anyway. So first of all, I'm writing down the word Armageddon because that's now a common word I'm going to use. I love that.
All right.
Armageddon. So no, we have not been great on compliance. I think actually a lot of people are getting it wrong, and it's just hasn't come to light yet that they need to do it properly. I don't know that it's hype. I think that it's obviously real, but of course it is still this kind of wait and see attitude, and so business is going to continue. You mentioned at the beginning that there was a quick drop um, of transactions happening when GDPR first went into effect, and then that and Digiday recently reported that it's we're back up to the same levels. I mean, look, people have budgets to spend, and you don't just not spend money because then you don't get the money back. That's how unfortunately budgeting works. And so the money is going to flow um, until it really demonstrates that it doesn't work anymore. And then that money is going to get shifted elsewhere. And so I have a feeling that right now, why not continue to do business, which is keeping, by the way, some of these companies that should probably die off haven't. Is just because there's actually still money and transactions happening, and they're going like, awesome, we live for another day.
Yeah, I mean, I get that too. I see that a lot of businesses are kind of like taking a wait and see mentality. How about you, Gillian? What's your take on this? Have businesses actually been doing a better job? Is it just a lot of hype, or are people waiting to see what's going to happen?
I don't think it's all hype. And I think the question of whether businesses have been doing a good job is still unanswered. And I think that's the reason why we haven't seen a lot of commotion recently, because we haven't gotten to the point where the people who are in charge of enforcement or who are going to be doling out the fines or bringing these issues to light, they're not ready yet. I think that's really the main reason why we haven't seen a lot going on. We, work, our headquarters at Linkilaw is in London, so we've done a lot of work with registering UK businesses as data controllers, which is something that's required from the office that supervises GDPR stuff in the UK. And their website was so overwhelmed with volume that you couldn't even register people for like 2 weeks because they just weren't prepared. So, I mean, I don't know if that's comforting or disconcerting, but I think the lawmakers and the enforcers were almost as caught off guard as some of the people who are trying to get ready. So they're trying to get their own side of it together. And once more of the dust has settled and they've got a hold on all of these new registrations, all of these new businesses whose information they need to be looking after, then I think we'll start to see a little bit more action.
Well, okay, and by action, do you mean lawsuits, litigation?
I don't think that we're going to see a ton of lawsuits right off the bat. I think based on statements that I've heard and read from some of the authoritative bodies that are controlling this in different areas of the EU, a lot of them, are taking a much more understanding approach than I expected them to. They realize that this is a lot of information, it's a lot to process. There are a lot of steps that have to be taken for compliance, and some of them have even said enforcement is going to be kind of our last case scenario. We're going to try to work with people to help them with practical implementation. So I think before we see lawsuits and fines, what we're going to see more of is kind of case studies and guidance, hopefully, where they're taking a look at what people are doing, making an evaluation of whether those are the right practical steps, providing some feedback and some guidance on what people can do better or what examples there are of businesses that are doing it right before they start taking swings at people.
So if I'm kind of like reading between the lines, what you're saying is that GDPR will continue to kind of like evolve organically based on the next few months and how things develop in the next few months?
Yeah, I think so. Businesses trying taking their take on implementation on how they can comply with this, and authorities actually taking a look at what businesses are doing and saying, oh, this is what we had in mind, or not at all what we were thinking, you should do it like this instead. So it's going to be kind of a collaborative effort.
All right. And how about you, Rob? Where do you see things settling in with GDPR? How will we go? Where will we go from here, basically?
Yeah, so I think and I agree with everything that Gillian just said, and at the same time, maybe because I'm just old and skeptical, I think some people are going to really wait for some laws and some things to actually happen. That I think the one thing that will accelerate everything, this is a prediction, right, is that in the next year, someone's going to have a data breach or something at a level that will bring the regulators together to go, right, let's use this as the example. And again, Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, that happened before GDPR happened, before May 25th. So, and again, maybe I'm talking outside my realm here, but I just think that someone's going to become the scapegoat or the example to be made of what's being done wrong. But yeah, I don't think mostly companies are going to get fined. I think that idea of some case studies is going to be really helpful. I just think it's going to take a little bit of the stick than the carrot to get people to comply with all of this, because it's not easy. And as I said, we talked before, there are companies that make their living off taking users' data and doing whatever they can with it. So, they're going to continue to do that until they get ousted out. So that's my prediction.
I think
Right.
that is true in a certain sense. Your point about someone becoming a scapegoat, I think that will happen. I think that's an accurate prediction, but I think the focus is going to be on big companies. It seems to me like there's a sliding scale of what the expectations are, and if you're a Facebook or a Google, then the bar has been set much higher for you. So I think if it's a big company that's in the public eye like that, then they should be watching what they're doing a lot closer than smaller companies who are trying to implement their own processes right now.
Right. Well, that makes sense. I guess, and this kind of like alludes back to what Rob was saying earlier about the political aspects of GDPR. And like my prediction would be that we're going to see a lot more GDPRs, just with different names, like what we're seeing with in California and in Canada. It has a lot of political appeal, especially if you go after big targets like Facebook and Google, but also if you go after the smaller ones as well, just to show that you're taking this seriously and that you're going to follow through. So of course this can carry a lot of political clout with politicians. So in election years, which the U.S. is experiencing right now, but U.S., Europe, all democracies. So at one point or another, there are elections going on somewhere. So I would think that this will expand a lot further beyond the borders of the EU in the near future.
I hate the term GDPRs. I hate that in the plural sense. I'll take apocalypse, but I will not take GDPRs.
Okay. All right. Well, 1 out of 2, I'll take that. That's a good percentage.
I mean, I think I have heard some things that the California stuff just seems to be in peril, that the lobbyists have been pushing to get that off the ballot. But there's there's going to be more regulation. It's just going to bubble up elsewhere. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. All right. There are a few questions that we have from our attendees, and if there are any more, please add some more in the comments while we field these. So we have a couple from Juraj. The first one is about data request, user data request. I'm assuming Juraj means SARs and the portability of data. So I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm guessing that what he's alluding to is about the possibility of somebody requesting the personal data from a publisher that they've collected on them, and then using that personal data to share it, and then share their own personal data or somebody else's with a competitor or something along those lines. Would you see that as a concern or something that can be used? Let's ask this in a different way. Can GDPR be used maliciously by companies who want to take that data and use it for their own purposes?
So I think, well, what the question's alluding to in the first place is the right to data portability, which is a new right that people have under the GDPR, and it means that individuals have the right to ask a business to provide them with all of the information that has been collected about them, and that business then has to turn around and give it back to them in a simple, readable electronic format. So I think, and I'm feel free to correct me if I'm understanding or misunderstanding the question, but as far as someone else requesting information or providing it in a malicious way, you can only make a request to obtain information about yourself. So there's not a situation where I can go to a company and ask them for all the information that they've collected about my neighbor. That would go against the whole point of the the legislation. But the point of data portability is so that people can obtain all the information they've given to one company and then turn around and give it to somebody else who they'd rather be working with. So I do think, I don't think that's malicious. I think that's just, you know, how competition works. But there is a chance of that happening.
All right, great. So thanks everybody. Thanks to Rob and thanks to Gillian for joining me. Thanks to all our attendees who have joined in and watched/listened to this this webinar. I will provide everybody with a recording, and you will receive that via email. I'm also going to provide you guys with, everybody's going to receive a link to the GDPR tag audit that we provide a free, Namogoo provides a free tag audit for your website to see which data processors are collecting data on your users, and we'll send all that over. Please stay tuned and stay close to your email inboxes, as this is the first of the GDPR webinar series, and we will be announcing the topic of the next one shortly. So yeah, again, thanks everybody, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar. All right, and bye-bye.
Thanks for putting it together.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.